When Sheriff Tom Bradley rode up to the Callahan property on a cold November morning in 1883, he wasn't expecting to find a woman calmly tending her vegetable garden. And he certainly wasn't expecting what she was about to show him. Sarah Callahan looked up from her work, dirt under her fingernails, a strand of dark hair escaping from beneath her worn hat. She was 32 years old, lean from hard work, capable hands. The kind of woman who could birth a calf, mend a fence, and shoot a rattlesnake before breakfast. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, her voice steady as bedrock. "Mrs. Callahan." Bradley tipped his hat, but his eyes were scanning the property. "I need to ask you some questions about the men who've gone missing in these parts." Sarah set down her gardening spade and stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, met his eyes without blinking. "Missing?" she said. "Or found?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Folks are saying 6 men came out this way in the past 6 months. None of them came back." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's about right." "You know where they are?" She pointed to the eastern edge of her property, where 6 wooden crosses stood in a neat row against the Montana sky. "They're right there, Sheriff. Every last one of them." Bradley's hand instinctively moved to his gun. "You telling me you killed 6 men?" "I'm telling you 6 men are buried on my land." Her voice didn't waver. "Whether I killed them or they got what they deserved is a matter of perspective." The sheriff stared at her. This woman, standing there in a flour sack dress and mud-caked boots, had just admitted to 6 bodies on her property, and she looked about as troubled as someone discussing the weather. "I think you better start explaining, Ma'am." Sarah Callahan smiled. Didn't reach her eyes. "I'll explain everything, Sheriff. But first, you need to understand who I was before all this. Because the woman standing in front of you isn't the woman I used to be. She died the same day my husband did. What I became after that?" She glanced at those 6 crosses. "That's a different story entirely." Flashback 14 months earlier, summer 1882. Sarah Callahan wasn't always a woman with graves on her property. 14 months before that cold November morning, she was simply Sarah, a homesteader's wife, a woman who'd traveled from Ohio to Montana territory with her husband James, chasing the promise of land and a future. They'd claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act in the spring of 1880. It wasn't much, a cabin James built with his own hands, a small barn, a creek that ran clear and cold through the western edge of the property. But it was theirs, and for 2 years, it was enough. Sarah could still remember the morning James had finished the cabin roof. He'd climbed down from the ladder, splinters in his hands, sweat on his brow, and picked her up like she weighed nothing, spun her around while she laughed and told him to put her down before he hurt himself. "This is ours, Sarah," he'd said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. "Every board, every nail. No bank owns it, no landlord. Just us." She'd believed him. God help her, she'd believed they were safe. James Callahan was a good man. Everyone said so. He was the kind who'd help a neighbor fix a broken wagon wheel without being asked. Who'd share seed when another homesteader's crop failed. Who'd break up fights in town with calm words instead of fists. He was gentle with the horses, patient when teaching Sarah to shoot. He laughed easily, sang terribly, made her coffee every morning before she woke up, the way her father used to do for her mother. Sarah had been raised to be practical. She didn't believe in fairy tales, but James Callahan had been the closest thing to one she'd ever known. They worked the land together, up before dawn, asleep after dark. Sarah learned to mend fence, to read the sky for rain, to deliver a breech calf when James couldn't get there in time. Her hands grew calloused. Her shoulders grew strong. She learned to love the silence of the Montana prairie, the way the wind moved through the grass like water, the cry of hawks circling overhead, the smell of sage after rain. By the summer of 1882, they'd proven up their claim. The land was officially theirs. They'd even started to prosper. A small herd of cattle, chickens, a vegetable garden that produced more than they could eat. James had talked about building a bigger house, maybe starting a family soon. Give it another year, Sarah had said, practical as always. Let's build up our savings first. Always planning ahead, James had teased, kissing her forehead.
That's why you're the brains of this operation. And you're the brawn?
I'm the devastating good looks, he'd said with that crooked grin she loved. The brawn is just a bonus. Sarah had rolled her eyes and gone back to kneading bread dough. But she'd been smiling. That was July by September. James Callahan would be dead, and Sarah would begin her transformation into something the Montana Territory
had never seen before. The trouble started
the way trouble always does in the territories, quietly, with men who believed that wanting something was the same as deserving it. The Carter Ranch bordered the Callahan property to the north, 5,000 acres owned by Marcus Carter, a man who'd made his fortune in cattle and intended to make more. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits even in the wilderness, who spoke softly and carried lawyers instead of guns. Sarah had met him exactly once at a town social in the summer of 1881. He'd been polite, charming even, asked about their homestead with what seemed like genuine interest. That's fine land you're on, Carter had said, swirling whiskey in a crystal glass that had no business being in a Montana saloon. Creek runs year-round, I hear. It does, James had said. We've been lucky. Luck, Carter smiled. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. At the time, Sarah had thought nothing of it. Rich men always wanted to talk about land. It was how they made conversation. But 2 weeks later, a man named Dawson rode up to their property. He was one of Carter's ranch hands, a big man with a scar across his left cheek and eyes that didn't match his smile. Mr. Carter wants you to know he's interested in purchasing your claim, Dawson had said, sitting on his horse while James stood in their yard. He's prepared to offer a fair price. We're not selling, James had said simply. Dawson's smile hadn't changed. Mr. Carter thought you might say that. He asked me to mention that homesteading is difficult work.
Dangerous even. Accidents happen out here.
Would be a shame if something happened to make you reconsider. Sarah had been standing in the cabin doorway. She'd felt the shift in the air. The way you feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. James had stepped forward. His voice stayed calm, but his body had gone very still. You tell Mr. Carter that we appreciate his concern for our safety.
And you tell him that if any accidents happen on our land, we'll be sure to investigate them thoroughly. Now get off my property. Dawson had tipped his hat.
Just delivering a message, friend. No need to be unfriendly. We're not friends, James had said. And I won't tell you again. Dawson had ridden away laughing. That night, Sarah had asked James if they should go to the sheriff. And say what? James had responded. A man made a vague comment about accidents. Bradley wouldn't do anything. Men like Carter don't make direct threats. They make suggestions.
And they have other people do their dirty work. So what do we do?
James had checked the load in his rifle. We watch our backs. And we don't scare easy, Sarah had nodded. She'd been raised on a farm in Ohio. She understood that sometimes you had to stand your ground. Her father had done it when a neighbor tried to claim their water rights. You didn't back down from bullies. But her father's neighbor had been a farmer with a bad temper, not a cattle baron with money and men. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Sarah began to think that maybe it had just been bluster. Maybe Carter had moved on to easier prey. She should have known better. It happened on a Tuesday. Sarah would remember that detail for the rest of her life. A Tuesday in September. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only exists in Montana in early fall. The air smelled like hay and dust and the first hint of coming winter. James had ridden out to check the fence line on the eastern edge of their property. It was something he did every few days, looking for breaks, checking for cattle that might have wandered, making sure everything was secure. I'll be back by lunch, he'd said, kissing her cheek. Don't make that potato soup without me. It's better when it sits, Sarah had said.
I'm making it now. Mutiny, James had declared dramatically. In my own home, she'd swatted him with a dish towel.
Watched him swing up into the saddle. He turned back once, tipped his hat at her with that grin. That was the last time Sarah Callahan saw her husband alive. When noon came and went with no sign of James, Sarah began to worry. When 2 o'clock passed, she saddled her own horse. When she reached the eastern fence line, she knew something was wrong before she saw anything. James's horse was standing riderless, reins trailing, about 100 yards from the creek. Sarah's heart had turned to ice in her chest. She found him near the water, face down in the shallow creek bed, his head at an angle that head shouldn't be, blood mixing with the clear water, turning it pink in the afternoon sun. For a long moment, Sarah couldn't move,
Couldn't breathe.
couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. Then she was running, splashing through the creek, falling to her knees beside him, turning him over with shaking hands. His neck was broken. His eyes were open but empty. His skin was already starting to cool. Sarah heard a sound like an animal dying. It took her several seconds to realize it was coming from her own throat. She held him,
Rocked him,
begged him to wake up even though she knew.
even though she could see. Later, she would never know how much later, she managed to get his body across his horse.
Managed to lead both horses back to the cabin.
Managed to lay him out in there.
Bed with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Then she rode to town for the sheriff. Sheriff Tom Bradley had looked at James's body with the kind of professional detachment that comes from seeing too much death in a lawless territory. Looks like his horse threw him, Bradley had said.
Broke his neck in the fall. I'm real sorry, Mrs. Callahan, but these things happen. His horse didn't throw him. The sheriff had looked at her with something like pity.
Ma'am, I know this is hard. His horse didn't throw him, Sarah had repeated, her voice flat. James could ride before he could walk. That horse was gentle as a lamb. And look at the body. Look at where he fell, Bradley had sighed. What exactly are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting someone killed my husband and made it look like an accident. Do you have any proof of that?
Marcus Carter threatened us 2 weeks ago. Sent one of his men to... Marcus Carter is a respected businessman, the sheriff had interrupted. And from what I hear, his man delivered a business offer. That's not a threat. Sarah had felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're not going to investigate? There's nothing to investigate, Mrs. Callahan. Your husband had an accident.
A tragic accident.
But an accident nonetheless.
I'll file a report.
You should think about what you're going to do with the property now that he's gone. I'm keeping it. Bradley had looked at her for a long moment. That might not be wise.
A woman alone out here. I'll manage. Mrs. Callahan, I'm trying to help you. If you sold to Carter, you'd have enough money to... Get out! The sheriff had blinked. Excuse me.
Get out of my house, now. Bradley had left. But not before saying, I'll be by in a few days to check on you. Make sure you're thinking clearly. Sarah had buried James herself the next day.
Dug the grave with her own hands because she couldn't stomach the thought of anyone else touching him.
Lowered him into the Montana earth he'd loved. Said words over him even though her voice kept breaking. Then she'd gone back to the cabin, sat at their table, and made a decision the law wouldn't help her. The sheriff was either in Carter's pocket or too cowardly to stand up to him. James was dead. The men who killed him would face no consequences unless she made them face consequences. Sarah Callahan had been raised to be a good woman, to follow rules, to trust in justice and law and the goodness of civilized society. But civilized society had just told her that her husband's murder didn't matter, that she should sell her land and go away quietly, that she should accept this. She would not accept this. She stood up from that table, walked to the cabinet where James kept his rifles, pulled out his Winchester, checked the load. Then she did something that would have shocked the woman she'd been just days before. She smiled. If they wanted her land, They'd have to come take it. And when they came, and she knew they would come, she would be ready. The first one came 3 days after the funeral. Sarah was in the barn, mucking stalls when she heard the horse approaching. She recognized the hoofbeats before she saw the rider.
Heavy horse.
Moving slow, someone who wasn't worried about being heard. She set down the pitchfork, wiped her hands on her trousers, picked up the rifle she'd started keeping within.
Arm's reach. The rider was a man she didn't recognize. 30-something, rough-looking, the
kind of drifter that frontier towns attracted like flies to.
Honey, he pulled up in front of the cabin.
Didn't dismount, just sat there, looking around the property like he was appraising livestock. Sarah stepped out of the barn, rifle held casually, not pointing at him. Not yet. Help you with something? She called out. The man's eyes found her, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Heard you might be selling this place, he said. His voice had a quality like gravel scraping on wood. Thought I'd come take a look. You heard wrong. I'm not selling, that's so, he smiled. Pretty woman like you all alone out here. Seems like you'd want company. Or protection. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger.
Still not raised.
But ready, I've got all the protection I need. She lifted the rifle just slightly. This and the 12 others like it inside. Now I'll ask you once more. You got business here? The man's smile faded.
Ain't very friendly, are you?
I'm friendly to people with legitimate business.
Are you one of those people?
He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. The funeral lady?
This land ain't worth dying for. Funny, Sarah said. I was just thinking the same thing about you. The man had ridden off.
But Sarah had seen it in his eyes. The calculation.
The consideration. He'd be back.
Or someone like him would be, and that's when Sarah Callahan had her second realization. She could sit here, waiting, defending, reacting, living.
In fear every time she heard a horse approaching, or she could do something that no one would expect. She
could become the hunter instead of the hunted. That night, Sarah sat at her table with a lantern, a piece of paper, and a pen. She wrote down everything she knew. Marcus Carter wanted her land. He'd killed James to get it, or had him killed, which was the same thing. Now he'd keep sending men until she either sold or ended up like James. The law wouldn't help her. Sheriff Bradley had made that clear. She could leave, take what she could carry, and abandon the land James died for. Or she could fight. But if she fought the way they expected, defensively, reactively, she'd lose.
One woman against how many men?
She might get 1 or 2, but eventually they'd overwhelm her, or burn her out, or just wait until she made a mistake. Sarah stared at that piece of paper for a long time. Then she started writing a different kind of list. She knew things about men, especially the kind of men who'd work for someone like Carter, the kind who'd help murder a homesteader for money. They were greedy. They were arrogant. They underestimated women, and they all thought they were smarter than they actually were. What if she used that? Sarah's pen moved faster now. What if she didn't wait for them to come to her? What if she made them want to come? What if she gave them a reason that had nothing to do with Carter? A reason that would bring them alone in secret when no one would see? What if she made them think they were the predators, right up until the moment they realized they were prey? By the time the lantern burned low, Sarah Callahan had a plan. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It was probably going to get her killed or hanged, but it was better than waiting to die. She folded the paper, put it in the stove, watched it burn. Then she went to bed and slept better than she had since James died. Because for the first time since she'd found her husband's broken body in that creek, Sarah Callahan had hope. Not the kind of hope that things would be okay. The kind of hope that comes from knowing exactly what you're going to do, and knowing that when you do it, it's going to hurt the right people. Sarah Callahan spent 3 days planning before she made her first move. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, a pencil, and paper. She wrote down everything she knew about the kind of men Marcus Carter would send. The kind of men who'd kill a homesteader for money. They were drifters, hired guns, men with no ties to the territory and no reputation to protect. Men who worked for cash and asked no questions. But more importantly, they were greedy, and greed, Sarah realized, was a weakness she could exploit. The plan that took shape over those 3 days was simple, audacious, and completely insane. But it just might work, the bait. First thing Sarah did was ride into town. She hadn't been to Helena since the funeral, hadn't wanted to face the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. But now she needed those whispers. She needed the town's gossip mill. She hitched her horse outside Morrison's general store on a Saturday afternoon when she knew it would be busy, walked in with her head high and her widow's black dress on. The store went quiet when she entered. Mrs. Morrison looked up from behind the counter, her face already arranging itself into an expression of sympathy. "Oh, Sarah dear, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing," Sarah said, loud enough for the other customers to hear. She moved to the counter, pulling out her shopping list. "I need supplies. Quite a bit, actually." "Of course, dear. What do you need?" Sarah made a show of consulting her list.
200 pounds of flour, 50 pounds of salt,
20 pounds of coffee, sugar, cornmeal, dried beans, ammunition for a Winchester, and she paused as if considering. "I'll need a new pickaxe."
a good one.
The one James had finally broke. Mrs. Morrison's eyebrows rose. That's quite a lot, Sarah. Are you sure you need all that? For just yourself?
I'm staying on the claim, Sarah said firmly. And I'm expanding operations. Expanding?
This from Mr. Peterson, who ran the livery. He'd been pretending to examine saddles near the front of the store, but Sarah knew he'd been listening.
What kind of operations?
Sarah turned to face him, let a small, secretive smile cross her face. The profitable kind. "Sarah," Mrs. Morrison said carefully, "maybe you should think about this."
A woman alone on a claim that size? I'm not leaving, Sarah interrupted.
That land is mine. James and I worked too hard for it.
And now... She lowered her voice just slightly, just enough that everyone would have to lean in to hear.
Now I've found something that makes it even more valuable. The store had gone completely silent. What did you find? Peterson asked. Sarah picked up a sack of flour, testing its weight.
I probably shouldn't say. Don't want to start a rush. A rush?
Mrs. Morrison's husband had emerged from the back room. Sarah, what are you talking about? Sarah set down the flour, looked around at all the faces watching her. When I was burying James, I dug deeper than I needed to. The ground on our eastern property line, near the creek, the soil there is different, rocky. And when I was shoveling, I found... She paused. Well, let's just say James and I might have been sitting on more than good grazing land. Gold? Peterson said it like a prayer. Sarah didn't confirm.
Didn't deny.
Just smiled that same small smile. I've said too much already. Please excuse me. I need to get these supplies home before dark. She paid for her goods.
Loaded them onto her wagon.
Rode out of town with every eye watching her go. By sunset, the rumor would be all over Helena. The widow Callahan had found gold on her claim. Sarah gave it 2 days. 2 days for the gossip to spread, for the story to grow in the telling, for the men in saloons and boarding houses to hear about the woman alone on a claim with a gold strike and no husband to protect it. She spent those 2 days preparing. She dug a hole. Not near the house, that would be too obvious, but out past the barn, in a spot sheltered by cottonwood trees where the ground was soft.
6 feet deep.
3 feet wide. She lined the bottom with quicklime she'd bought on a separate trip to a different town. She cleaned James's guns.
All of them.
Checked the loads. Practiced drawing from concealment. She walked her property and picked her spots. Places where she'd have the advantage. Where the terrain worked for her. Where a man wouldn't see danger until it was too late. And she waited. On the third day, he came. The first, Sarah was mucking out the barn when she heard the horse,
Single rider, coming from the east.
moving at an easy pace like he had all the time in the world. She set down her shovel, wiped her hands on her trousers, touched the pistol she now kept tucked in her waistband at all times. Then she walked out to meet him. The man who rode into her yard was maybe 40, lean and hard-looking, with the kind of sun-weathered face that spoke of years outdoors. He wore a gun on his hip and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called out, tipping his hat. "Name's Bill Craddock. I'm a prospector passing through. Heard in town you might have found color on your claim." Sarah shaded her eyes, looking up at him. "News travels fast. It does when it's about gold." He dismounted, walking his horse closer. "I was wondering if you might be looking for a partner.
Someone who knows mining.
Who could help you extract what you found? In exchange for what? Half the claim?" Craddock laughed. "Nothing so greedy.
Maybe a third.
Maybe just a percentage of what we pull out. We could work out terms." Sarah studied him, saw the way his eyes kept moving, cataloguing the property, looking for weakness, counting doors and windows. She knew his type, knew that he hadn't come here to partner with anyone. He'd come to take, to intimidate a widow into selling, or just take what he wanted and leave her dead in a ditch, the same way someone had done to James. "Tell you what," Sarah said. "Why don't you put your horse in the barn and come up to the house? We can discuss terms over coffee." Craddock's smile widened. "That's mighty hospitable of you, ma'am." "I believe in hearing people out," Sarah said. "The gold site is out past the eastern fence line, near the creek. After coffee, I could show you where I found it. You could tell me if you think it's worth pursuing." "I'd like that very much." "Good." Sarah turned toward the house. "Barn's behind you."
"I'll put the coffee on." She walked away.
Felt his eyes on her back. Knew he was thinking this was going to be easy. Poor bastard had no idea. Sarah moved through her kitchen with practiced efficiency, put the coffee pot on the stove, set out 2 cups, listened to the sounds of Craddock putting his horse in the barn. Her hand was steady as she reached into the cabinet, pulled out the small glass vial she'd prepared. Laudanum, a heavy dose, enough to make a man drowsy, confused, slow. She poured it into one of the cups. When Craddock knocked on the door 5 minutes later, Sarah was sitting at the table looking like any frontier housewife offering hospitality. "Come in," she called. He entered, hat in hand, still wearing that smile. His gun was still on his hip. Sarah noticed he'd positioned himself so he could see both doors. Careful, but not careful enough. "Smells good," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Should be ready in just a minute." Sarah stood, moved to the stove, poured 2 cups, set them on the table. "Sugar?"
"I'm afraid I don't have cream. Black is fine." Sarah pushed the drugged cup toward him.
Took the clean one for herself. Craddock lifted his cup, paused, looked at her. "You're not drinking?" Sarah raised her own cup to her lips, took a sip.
"Too hot."
"I'm letting mine cool." He watched her for another moment, then shrugged and drank. They sat in silence for a minute. "2." Sarah sipped her coffee and watched Craddock drain his cup. "So," he said, setting the cup down.
"This gold you found, how much are we talking about?"
"Hard to say. I'm not an expert." Sarah refilled his cup, but it looked promising. "And you found it where exactly?"
"Near the creek. I can show you after you finish your coffee." Craddock picked up the second cup.
Drank again. "Forgive me for saying so, ma'am, but you don't seem too worried about a strange man in your house." "Should I be worried? Some women would be."
"Out here alone."
"No husband?" Sarah met his eyes. "I have a rifle loaded and pointed at your chest from under this table. So no, Mr. Craddock, I'm not worried." He froze, looked down, couldn't see under the tablecloth, but now that she'd said it, he could probably feel it, the sense of something aimed at him. "And that's not very friendly," he said slowly. "Neither is coming to a widow's home pretending to be a prospector when you're really here to rob me."
"Or worse." Craddock's hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't, Sarah said calmly. My finger's on the trigger.
You'll be dead before you clear leather. He stopped, stared at her. You're making a mistake, lady. The mistake would be trusting you. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Here's what's going to happen.
You're going to sit there quietly.
In about 5 minutes, you're going to start feeling very tired.
Very confused. And then we're going to take a walk. You drugged me?
Craddock started to stand, swayed, put his hand on the table to steady himself.
You sit down, Sarah said.
Before you fall down, he tried to draw his gun. His hand fumbled at the holster, couldn't seem to grasp it properly. His legs buckled. Sarah stood, walked around the table, removed his gun from his holster and set it on the counter. Then she pulled out a length of rope she'd hidden under the sink. What?
What are you? Craddock's words were slurring now. His eyes were having trouble focusing. What am I doing?
Sarah began tying his hands. I'm making sure you can't hurt anyone else. I'm making sure men like you understand that this land isn't for taking. And I'm doing what the law won't do.
You're crazy.
Maybe. Sarah finished with his hands and started on his feet. Or maybe I'm just done being afraid. When Craddock was securely bound, Sarah dragged him, still conscious but unable to fight, out of the house. Across the yard, past the barn to the hole she'd dug. Craddock's eyes widened when he saw it.
Understanding cut through the drug haze. No, he managed. No, you can't. Did Marcus Carter send you? Sarah asked. Who?
Sarah grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. Did Marcus Carter send you? Or did you come on your own?
I don't know any Marcus. Sarah searched his eyes.
Saw confusion, fear, but not recognition. He hadn't been sent by Carter. He'd come on his own. Drawn by the rumor of gold and an easy target, just a common thief. A predator who'd seen a vulnerable woman and thought he'd found easy prey. My husband was murdered 3 weeks ago, Sarah said quietly. Men like you, men who think they can take whatever they want from people who can't fight back, they killed him. The law did nothing. The sheriff did nothing.
So I'm doing something. Please, Craddock whispered.
The drug was really hitting him now.
Please don't. Sarah pulled out James's pistol.
The one she'd loaded that morning. The one she'd been carrying for 3 days, waiting for this moment. You came to my land to rob me.
Maybe kill me. Take what wasn't yours. Her hand was steady. This is what happens to men who do that. I wasn't going to... Yes, you were. Sarah's voice was cold.
You absolutely were.
I saw it in your eyes the moment you rode up.
You thought I was weak, alone, easy. She raised the gun. You were wrong. The shot echoed across the Montana prairie, birds scattered from the cottonwood trees. Craddock's body jerked once, then went still. Sarah stood there for a long moment, the gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Her hand started to shake. She'd just killed a man, shot him in cold blood, executed him in a hole like an animal. Sarah waited for the horror, the regret, the overwhelming guilt that should come with taking a human life. It didn't come. What came instead was a strange, cold clarity. This man had come to hurt her, to take from her, to do to her what had been done to James, and she'd stopped him. More than that, she'd made him pay. Sarah lowered the gun, looked down at the body in the hole. One, she said quietly. Then she picked up the shovel and started filling in the grave. The pattern begins. A second one came 4 days later. Sarah had spent those 4 days in a strange state of calm. She'd expected nightmares, guilt, some kind of psychological break. Instead, she slept better than she had since James died. She went about her chores with mechanical efficiency.
Fed the animals.
Maintained the property. Placed a wooden cross over Craddock's grave. And waited for the next one. His name was Dutch McCarthy. and he made even less effort to hide what he was than Craddock had. He rode in at sunset with 2 pistols on his hips and a rifle across his saddle. "Didn't bother with pleasantries. Heard you got gold on this claim," he said from horseback. "Heard you're looking for help working it." "I never said I was looking for help," Sarah replied. She was standing on her porch, rifle in plain view. Dutch smiled.
Ugly smile.
"Well, now you should be. Woman alone can't work a gold claim. Dangerous out here."
You need protection. From who?
"From men who might want to take what's yours." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Of course, if you had a partner, someone strong enough to keep you safe, you wouldn't have to worry about that." "And you're offering your services? For a fair price, which would be?" "Half the claim."
Half the gold and... His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Other considerations. There it was.
Not even pretending to be civilized. Sarah felt the cold calm settle over her again, the same feeling she'd had with Craddock. This man wasn't here for gold. He was here to take everything, the land, whatever wealth there was. Her. Men like this had probably killed James, maybe not Dutch specifically, but men exactly like him.
Men who believed might made right.
Who saw gentleness as weakness and kindness as an invitation to take. "I'll need to think about your offer," Sarah said.
It's getting late.
"Why don't you stay in the barn tonight? I'll have an answer for you in the morning." Dutch looked suspicious. "The barn? I'm a widow, Mr. McCarthy. Propriety matters. You can sleep in the barn. I'll bring you dinner and breakfast. We can discuss terms in daylight." He considered this, probably trying to figure out if it was a trap. But his arrogance won out. He thought he was too smart, too strong, too armed for one woman to be a threat. "All right," he said. "But I'll want that answer by morning. I'm not a patient man. I'm sure you're not." Sarah brought him dinner an hour later.
Beef stew, bread, and drugged coffee. She watched from the barn doorway as he ate.
Watched his movements get slower.
His eyes get heavy. "You feel all right, Mr. McCarthy?"
She asked. "Tired," he muttered. "Long ride, I'm sure it was." Sarah stepped into the barn. "Why don't you lie down?"
"Rest, we can talk in the morning." Dutch tried to stand.
Fell back onto the hay, tried to reach for his gun. Sarah had already taken it. Both of them.
And the rifle. And the knife he had in his boot. "What did you?" "Same thing I did to the last man who came here thinking I was easy prey," Sarah said. She bound him.
Dragged him to the second hole she'd dug. This time, when Dutch regained enough consciousness to understand where he was, he didn't beg. He cursed, threatened, told her in explicit detail what he was going to do to her when he got free. Sarah listened to all
of it with that same cold calm. Then she shot him. 2, she said. Filled.
In the grave. Placed another cross. Went to bed. The transformation met. The time the 5th man came, a hard-faced killer named Tom Sutton, who didn't even bother with the pretense of prospecting and just demanded she sign over the deed. Sarah had stopped feeling
anything at all. The process had become mechanical. Lure them in, drug them, bind them.
Get whatever information she could about who sent them or what they knew, execute them, bury them, mark the grave, wait for the next one. She'd learned things. Gotten better at it, more efficient. She'd learned that laudanum worked faster on an empty stomach, so she stopped offering food first. She'd learned that men talked more when they were desperate, so she'd ask her questions while they were in the hole. After they understood their situation, she'd learned that some of them had been sent by Carter. Those were the ones she took the most satisfaction in killing.
Others had come on their own, drawn by the rumor of gold and a woman alone. She killed them all the same. By the 6th grave.
Sarah Callahan had stopped pretending she was the same woman who'd buried her husband 2 months ago. That woman had believed in law,
in justice,
in the essential goodness of civilized society. This woman knew better. She stood in front of the 6 crosses one evening, the setting sun painting the Montana sky in shades of red and gold. 6 men dead by her hand. She waited for guilt,
For horror.
for some sign that what she was doing was wrong. Instead, she felt powerful. For the first time since James died, she felt like she had control, like she wasn't a victim waiting for the next bad thing to happen. She was the bad thing that happened to men who deserved it. "I'm not sorry," she said out loud.
To the graves.
To James's memory. To God if he was listening.
I'm not sorry for any of it. The wind whispered through the grass.
The crosses stood silent, and Sarah Callahan
Accepted what she'd become. Not a victim, not a widow waiting for rescue, a hunter. And there was still one more man coming. The
6th. She could feel it, one more, and then she'd decide what came next. Sarah turned from the graves and walked back toward her house. Her stride was confident, sure. She'd been underestimated her entire life. First, as a daughter who was too practical to be married, easily. Then as a wife who was too opinionated for her own good. Then as a widow who should let the men handle things. Men had looked at her and seen
weakness, opportunity, something to use or take or discard. They'd
all learn different. And one more was about to learn the
hardest lesson of all. Because the 6th man
wouldn't be like the others. The 6th man would be
special. The 6th man would
be the one Marcus Carter sent when he finally realized his other men weren't coming back. And when that man came,
Sarah would be ready to end this one way or another.
The 6th man arrived on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was carrying water from the well when she saw the rider coming from the north.
Not the east, like the others.
From Carter's direction, she set down the bucket, touched the pistol at her waist, watched him approach. This one was different. He sat his horse like a man born to the saddle. Older, maybe 50, with grey at his temples and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. He wore a marshal's badge on his vest. Sarah's blood went cold. A lawman.
Carter had sent a lawman. The man pulled up 20 feet from her porch. Didn't dismount.
Just sat there, studying her with sharp blue eyes. "Mrs. Callahan?" His voice was gravelly, but not unkind. "That's right. I'm Deputy Marshal Clayton Webb. I'd like to ask you some questions." Sarah's mind raced.
Had someone found the graves? Had one of the men's families come looking?
Questions about what? 6 men have gone missing in this area over the past 2 months. You're on the route between Helena and the mining camps.
I'm talking to everyone along this road. 6, not 6.
He didn't know about Dutch yet. "I haven't seen anyone," Sarah said carefully. Webb's eyes didn't leave her face.
"That's interesting."
"Because 3 of those men told people in town they were heading to your property specifically."
"Something about a gold strike. There is no gold strike."
"That was a rumor." "A rumor you started," Sarah said nothing. Webb finally dismounted, moved slowly, hands visible.
"I'm not here to cause trouble, Mrs. Callahan, but 6 men don't just vanish."
"And you're the last known destination for half of them. Or maybe they moved on. Drifters do that, maybe." Webb walked closer. Sarah's hand moved toward her gun. He saw it, stopped. Or maybe something else happened to them. Like what?
"That's what I'm trying to figure out." He gestured to her property. "Mind if I look around?"
Sarah's throat tightened. The graves were visible from here if you knew where to look. 6 wooden crosses in a neat row. She had 2 choices. Refuse and confirm his suspicions, or let him look and end this now. She'd known this moment would come eventually. "Go ahead," she said. Webb nodded, started walking the property. Sarah followed at a distance, her hand never leaving her gun. It took him less than 5 minutes to find them. He stood in front of the 6 graves for a long moment, then turned to face her. "Mrs. Callahan, I need you to tell me what happened here." Sarah met his eyes.
"They came to rob me, or worse."
"So I stopped them. All 6? "All 6. Webb's hand moved to his gun. "I'm gonna need you to come with me." "No, Mom, you just admitted to killing 6 men in self-defense.
On my own property. Men who came here with bad intentions. That's for a jury to decide. Webb's voice stayed calm. Please don't make this difficult. Sarah drew her pistol, aimed it at his chest. Webb sighed.
Didn't draw his own gun. Shooting a federal marshal won't help your case. Neither will letting you arrest me before I can tell my side. I'm giving you the chance to tell your side.
Right now.
Talk to me. Sarah kept the gun steady, studied his face, saw something there she hadn't expected. He wasn't angry.
Wasn't disgusted. He looked curious. Why?
She asked. Why do you care what I have to say? Because I've been a lawman for 30 years, Mrs. Callahan, and in that time, I've learned that things aren't always what they seem. He gestured to the graves.
6 men, 6 graves.
6 crosses. Someone who just wanted to kill would have hidden the bodies, but you marked them. Why? Sarah lowered her gun slightly. Because I'm not a murderer.
I'm someone who did what the law wouldn't do. Tell me. So she did. She told him about James. About the accident that wasn't an accident.
About Sheriff Bradley refusing to investigate. About Marcus Carter's threats. She told him about the plan, the bait, the men who came, and she told him the part she'd discovered after the 3rd killing. I searched their belongings, Sarah said.
Every one of them.
The first 2 had letters from Carter's ranch. Instructions, payments. They'd been hired to drive me off or kill me. Webb's expression shifted.
You have these letters? Hidden.
Along with every piece of evidence I collected from all 6. Show me. Sarah led Webb into her house, pulled up a floorboard under her bed, removed a metal box. Inside were letters, bills of sale, receipts, a journal where she'd documented every kill, dates, names, what they'd said, what she'd found. Webb read through it all in silence. Finally, he looked up. Marcus Carter hired these men to kill you. The first 4, yes. The last 2 came on their own, heard the rumor, and thought they'd found easy prey. And you killed them all anyway. They came to hurt me, to take what was mine.
Yes, I killed them. Sarah's voice hardened.
And I'd do it again. Webb set down the papers. Mrs. Callahan, do you know what you've done?
I've defended myself. You've confessed to 6 murders to a federal marshal. He stood. I have to take you in. Sarah raised her gun again.
No, listen to me. You listen to me, Sarah interrupted. My husband was murdered. The local sheriff did nothing. The law failed me, so I became my own law. You can arrest me, but that doesn't change the fact that every man in those graves deserved to be there. Webb studied her for a long moment, then did something that shocked her. He smiled. You know what, Mrs. Callahan?
You're right, Sarah blinked. What?
Those men deserved what they got, and Marcus Carter deserves to answer for sending them. Webb picked up the evidence box. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to come with me voluntarily. We're going to Helena. We're going to tell the territorial judge everything. And we're going to make sure this evidence gets heard. Why would you help me? Because the law failed you. And I'm tired of seeing the law protect men like Carter, while women like you have to become killers to survive. He extended his hand. Trust me, Sarah looked at his hand, at his face, at the badge on his chest. She'd stopped trusting lawmen the day Sheriff Bradley dismissed her husband's murder. But something in Webb's eyes was different. If this is a trick...
It's not. Webb's voice was firm.
You have my word. And my word means something. Sarah lowered her gun, took his hand. All right, Marshal.
Let's go see the judge. The ride to Helena took 4 hours. Webb didn't bind her hands.
Didn't treat her like a prisoner. They rode side by side, the evidence box strapped to his saddle. You know people are going to call you a monster, Webb said as they rode. Let them. The newspapers will have a field day. The widow killer. The Black Widow of Montana. I don't care about newspapers. Webb glanced at her. What do you care about? Sarah thought about that, making sure it meant something. That James didn't die for nothing. That those men didn't get away with it. They didn't, you made sure of that. At what cost? That's what we're about to find out. They reached Helena as the sun was setting. Word of Sarah's arrival spread through town like wildfire. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered. Sheriff Bradley was waiting on the steps. His face went pale when he saw Sarah. "Marshal Webb," he said carefully. "What's this about?" "Step aside, Sheriff. I need to speak with Judge Harrison. That woman is a murderer. That woman is under federal protection pending a hearing." Webb's voice cut like a knife. "Now step aside or I'll arrest you for obstruction." Bradley stepped aside. The crowd followed them to the courthouse. Whispers and shouts. Women clutching their children. Men calling for Sarah to hang. Sarah kept her head high.
"Let them stare."
Let them judge. She'd faced down 6 killers. A mob didn't scare her. Judge Harrison was a stern-faced man in his 60s who'd been dispensing frontier justice for 20 years. He listened to Webb's account without interruption.
"Read through the evidence."
Examined Sarah's journal. Finally, he looked at her. "Mrs. Callahan, you admit to killing 6 men?"
"Yes, Your Honor." "In cold blood?"
"In self-defense. By luring them to your property with false rumors of gold. By using the only weapon available to me, their greed." Harrison leaned back. "That's a fine distinction. It's an honest one." The judge was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to set a trial date for 2 weeks from now. Until then, you'll be held in custody." "Your Honor," Webb started. "In her own home," Harrison continued. "Under house arrest. Marshal Webb will check on her daily. She's not to leave her property." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Not jail, home." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Callahan. The trial will determine your fate."
"And I promise you it won't be easy." Harrison looked at the evidence box.
"But I also promise you'll get a fair hearing. Something you should have received when your husband died." He dismissed them. As Sarah and Webb left the courthouse, the crowd had swelled.
Angry faces.
Shouted accusations, but Sarah noticed something else. In the back of the crowd, a group of women stood silent, watching. Their faces weren't angry, they looked understanding. The 2 weeks before trial were the longest of Sarah's life. Marshal Webb visited daily, as promised, brought her news from town. The newspapers were indeed calling her terrible names. But petitions were circulating too, women demanding she be heard fairly. "Marcus Carter has hired 3 lawyers," Webb told her on day 5. "He's claiming you've slandered him, that you fabricated the evidence. Did you expect anything different?" "No, but our prosecutor is good."
"And the evidence is solid." Webb handed her a newspaper.
"You're famous, Mrs. Callahan, or infamous, depending on who you ask." Sarah read the headline. "Widow confesses to 6 murders, claims self-defense." They make me sound like a monster. "Some people think you are." Webb sat across from her. "Others think you're a hero. I'm neither. I'm just someone who refused to be a victim. That's what you need to say at trial."
Exactly that. The night before the trial, Sarah stood in front of the 6 graves one last time. She'd added a 6th cross.
"For James, I did it," she said quietly.
"I made them pay.
"All of them. And tomorrow, I'll make sure everyone knows why." The wind whispered through the grass. Sarah turned and walked back to the house. Tomorrow, she'd face a jury, face judgment, face the consequences of what she'd become, but she wouldn't face it with regret. She'd
face it with the truth. And the truth was simple. She'd been underestimated, dismissed, told to accept injustice, and
she'd refused. Whatever happened tomorrow, she'd done that. She'd refused to be prey, and that, Sarah thought as she lay in bed waiting for dawn, was worth everything that came next. The courtroom was packed. Sarah sat at the defendant's table in the same black dress she'd worn to bury James. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. She looked every person in that courtroom in the eye as they filed in. Let them see her. Let them judge. She wasn't afraid. The jury was 12 men, no surprise there. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a banker,
a blacksmith.
Men who'd never had to defend themselves the way she had. Men who'd never been dismissed by the law, but men who might understand justice when they saw it. The prosecutor was a thin man named Morrison who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade. Carter's lawyers were a trio of expensive suits from San Francisco who smelled like cigars and entitlement. And sitting in the front row, looking calm and confident, was Marcus Carter himself. Sarah stared at him, the man who'd ordered her husband killed, who'd sent 6 men to drive her off or destroy her. Carter met her eyes and smiled. That smile said everything.
It said he thought he'd already won.
That even if she told the truth, no one would believe a woman over him. Sarah smiled back. Her smile said, "You have no idea what's coming." Judge Harrison entered. Everyone stood. "The territory of Montana versus Sarah Callahan," Harrison announced. "The defendant is charged with 6 counts of murder." "How does the defendant plead?" Sarah stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "Then let's proceed," Harrison said. "Mr. Morrison, your opening statement." Morrison painted Sarah as a cold-blooded killer who'd lured innocent men to their deaths. She spread lies about gold, he told the jury, deliberately created a false rumor to attract men to her property. Then she drugged them, bound them, and executed them in holes she'd dug like graves. This wasn't self-defense, gentlemen. This was premeditated murder.
6 times over, he called witnesses.
Townspeople who testified about Sarah's strange behavior after James died. The suspicious purchases, the heavy supplies, the pickaxe. He called a doctor who testified that laudanum in the doses Sarah used could be lethal, that she'd known exactly what she was doing. He made her sound like a monster. Sarah watched it all with the same calm she'd felt standing over those graves. When Morrison rested his case, Carter's lawyers took over. They were smoother, more polished. They talked about Sarah's clear mental instability following her husband's tragic accident. They suggested she'd invented the gold rumor because she was delusional, that the men had probably come to help her, and she'd killed them in paranoid delusion. "Mrs. Callahan is not a murderer," the lead lawyer said with practiced sympathy. "She's a deeply troubled woman who needs treatment, not execution. But she is dangerous, gentlemen, and she must be stopped before more innocent men die." By the time they finished, half the courtroom was looking at Sarah with pity. The other half looked ready to hang her. Then Marshal Webb stood. "Your Honor, the defense calls Sarah Callahan to the stand." Sarah took the stand with steady hands, placed them on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then she told it, all of it. She started with James, their life together, the homestead, the happiness they'd built. Her voice was calm, clear. She didn't cry, didn't beg for sympathy, she just told the truth. "My husband was murdered," she said. "His neck was broken, and he was left in the creek to make it look like an accident. I reported it to Sheriff Bradley."
"He did nothing." "Objection," Morrison said.
"Speculation about the cause of death." "Overruled," Harrison said. "Continue, Mrs. Callahan." Sarah told them about Carter's threats,
About Dawson's visit.
about the suggestion that accidents happened to homesteaders who didn't sell. Carter's lawyers objected. Harrison allowed the testimony. She told them about going to the law, about Bradley's refusal to investigate, about being told to sell and leave. "So you took the law into your own hands," Morrison said during cross-examination. "No," Sarah replied. "I defended myself when the law refused to defend me." "By luring men to your property?" "By using the only advantage I had." Sarah looked at the jury.
"I'm a woman, alone. I can't outfight a man in a fair confrontation."
"So I made the confrontation unfair."
"I made it favor me instead of them." "You admit to premeditation, then?" "I admit to planning my survival, yes." Morrison smiled like he'd won.
No further questions. Webb stood for redirect. Mrs. Callahan, what did you find when you searched the first man's belongings? Sarah pulled out the letters. Read them aloud. Letters from Carter's ranch. Instructions to persuade the widow to sell by any means necessary. Payments for services rendered. The courtroom erupted. This is fabricated. Carter's lawyer shouted. The handwriting has been verified, Webb said calmly, by 3 independent experts. These letters are real, and they prove Marcus Carter hired men to drive Mrs. Callahan off her land. Harrison banged his gavel. Order! Mr. Carter, you'll have your chance to testify. But Carter's face had gone white. Sarah continued, showed the evidence from each man. Bills of sale from Carter's properties, receipts signed by Carter's foreman, a pattern of payments to known violent men. 4 of the 6 men I killed were sent by Marcus Carter, Sarah said. The other 2 came because I created an opportunity.
A rumor that would attract exactly the kind of men who'd think a widow was easy prey. And you killed them too, Morrison interjected. Yes. Even though they weren't sent by Carter, they came to rob me.
One of them told me exactly what he planned to do to me before he took my land. Sarah's voice hardened. So yes, I killed him.
And I'd do it again, even though you could have simply run them off.
Fired a warning shot?
And wait for them to come back at night.
With friends.
To burn my house, rape me, kill me like they killed James.
Sarah leaned forward. I'm not sorry for surviving, Mr. Morrison, and I won't apologize for making sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. Morrison had no response to that. Webb called Marshal Webb to the stand.
Had him verify the evidence.
Confirm the investigation. Then he did something brilliant. He called women from the town, women who'd been threatened by drifters, women who'd gone to the law and been dismissed, women who'd been told to stop being hysterical or let the men handle it. One by one, they testified, and the jury listened. I was attacked 3 years ago, one woman said.
I knew who did it.
I reported it.
Nothing happened.
The sheriff told me I probably misunderstood the situation. Another? My husband died in a mining accident. I know it wasn't an accident.
I begged for an investigation.
I was told I was being emotional. Another. I've been threatened twice by men who wanted my land. The law did nothing.
I had to sell and leave because I couldn't defend myself alone. By the time the 5th woman testified,
several jury members were looking uncomfortable. The last witness Webb called was unexpected. Sheriff Tom Bradley. Bradley looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sheriff, Webb said. When Mrs. Callahan reported her husband's death, did you investigate?
I examined the body. Did you investigate the possibility of murder?
Bradley shifted. There was no evidence of murder. Did you look for evidence?
The situation seemed clear. Did you look for evidence? Webb repeated. No, Bradley finally admitted. Why not? I didn't think it was necessary. Even though Mrs. Callahan told you her husband had been threatened.
Bradley said nothing. Sheriff Bradley, Webb said quietly. Did Marcus Carter make a donation to your re-election campaign last year? Carter's lawyers exploded with objections. Harrison overruled them. Bradley's face went red.
That has nothing to do with it. Answer the question. Yes, he donated.
But that didn't... How much? $500. The courtroom erupted again. No further questions, Webb said. Carter took the stand in his expensive suit, looking every inch the respectable businessman. His lawyers asked softball questions, let him talk about his legitimate business, his charitable donations, his standing in the community. Then Webb stood for cross-examination. Mr. Carter, do you own the ranch bordering Mrs. Callahan's property?
I do. Have you tried to purchase her land?
I made an offer once.
A fair one?
She declined. Just once? Yes, Webb pulled out documents. These are property records. They show you've purchased 16 homesteads surrounding your ranch in the past 5 years. Is that correct? Carter hesitated. I've expanded my operations, yes. How many of those homesteaders sold willingly?
I don't know what you mean. How many sold because they wanted to versus how many sold because they were pressured? Objection.
Carter's lawyer jumped up.
Speculation.
Sustained, Harrison said. But the jury was paying attention. Webb changed tactics. Mr. Carter, do you know a man named Bill Craddock? No. Dutch McCarthy?
No. Tom Sutton?
I don't know these men. Webb laid out the payment records, showed the signatures, the dates. These records show payments from your accounts to these men in the weeks before they died.
Can you explain that?
My foreman handles hiring. Your foreman, who conveniently left town 2 weeks ago and hasn't been seen since? Carter had no answer. Webb hammered him for another hour. By the end, Carter was sweating, contradicting himself, looking nothing like the confident businessman who'd taken the stand. When Webb finished, Carter practically fled the witness box. Morrison's closing argument was passionate. He talked about law and order,
about the danger of vigilante justice,
about how society would collapse if everyone took the law into their own hands. If we allow this, he said, where does it end? Who else gets to decide they're above the law? Mrs. Callahan may have had grievances, but that doesn't give her the right to execute 6 men. Carter's lawyers echoed the same themes, added that Sarah was dangerous, unstable, needed to be locked away for everyone's safety. Then Webb stood for his closing. He was quiet.
Didn't shout.
Didn't perform, he just talked. Gentlemen of the jury, you've heard a lot over these past 3 days, but it comes down to one simple question. What would you have done? He let that hang in the air. If your wife was threatened and the law did nothing, what would you do? If your home was under attack and no one came to help, what would you do? If the people sworn to protect you were in the pocket of the man trying to destroy you, what would you do? Webb walked to the jury box, looked each man in the eye. Sarah Callahan did what any of you would do. She survived. She used her intelligence, her courage, and yes, her willingness to kill to protect herself. That's not murder, gentlemen.
That's self-defense.
That's the most basic human right there is. He turned to Sarah. Is she a killer?
Yeah, she killed 6 men.
But every single one of those men came to her land with the intent to harm her.
Every single one. The evidence proves it.
The letters prove it. Their own actions prove it. Webb faced the jury again. Marcus Carter tried to have her killed. When that didn't work, his reputation as a businessman attracted other predators.
And Sarah Callahan stopped every single one.
Not because she wanted to kill, but because she wanted to live. His voice dropped. The prosecutor asked where it ends if we allow this.
I ask you, where does it end if we don't? How many women have to die because the law won't protect them?
How many families have to be destroyed because powerful men can buy sheriffs and judges? He pointed at Carter.
That man killed James Callahan as surely as if he'd broken his neck himself. And then he sent 6 more men to finish the job.
Sarah Callahan is not on trial here.
Marcus Carter is.
And the question before you is simple. Do we punish the woman who refused to be a victim? Or do we finally hold the real criminals accountable? Webb returned to his seat. The courtroom was silent. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Gentlemen of the jury, you may begin your deliberations. The jury was out for 4 hours. Sarah waited in the side room with Marshal Webb. She was calm, almost eerily so. However this goes, she said, thank you. We haven't won yet. We've already won. The truth is out. Carter's finished whether I hang or not. Webb studied her. You really would be okay with hanging?
I'd prefer not to, Sarah said with a slight smile.
But I've made my peace with it.
I did what I had to do. I don't regret it. A knock came at the door.
Jury's back. They returned to the courtroom. The crowd had somehow grown even larger. Sarah took her place at the defendant's table. The jury filed in. Not one of them looked at her. That was supposed to be a bad sign. Has the jury reached a verdict? Harrison asked. The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder in the 1st degree, how do you find? The foreman looked at Sarah, then at Carter, then back at the judge. Not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly.
Order! There are 6 charges.
One by one, the foreman read them. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. 6 acquittals. Sarah closed her eyes. Let the relief wash over her. She was free. When the courtroom finally quieted, the foreman spoke again. Your Honor, the jury has a statement. Harrison looked surprised. Go ahead. We find that Sarah Callahan acted in legitimate self-defense. Furthermore, we believe Marcus Carter should be investigated for conspiracy to commit murder.
And we believe Sheriff Bradley should be removed from office for corruption and dereliction of duty. The courtroom erupted again. Carter was on his feet, shouting. His lawyers were shouting.
Half the crowd was cheering, the other half was screaming. Harrison's gavel came down like thunder. Order! I will have order, or I will clear this courtroom. When it finally quieted, Harrison looked at Marshal Webb. Marshal, please arrest Marcus Carter on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. Webb smiled. With pleasure, Your Honor. As Carter was led away in chains, still protesting, still denying, Sarah Callahan stood. She looked at the jury, at the women in the crowd who were crying and applauding,
at Marshal Webb who believed her, and
she finally let herself feel it, not just relief. Victory, Sarah. Callahan returned to her homestead 3 days after the trial. Marcus Carter was convicted 6 months later. He died in prison 2 years after that. Sheriff Bradley resigned in disgrace and left Montana. Sarah lived on her land for another 43 years. She never remarried,
never had children.
But she became something else, a legend. Women across the territory, across the West, heard her story. The woman who'd fought back, who'd refused to be a victim, who'd used her intelligence and courage to survive when the law failed her. Some called her a hero, some called her a monster. Sarah didn't care about either label. She'd simply refused to accept that her life, her land, and her safety were worth less than the men who tried to take them. In the years after the trial, something shifted in Montana territory. Women started defending their homesteads more openly. Sheriffs started investigating when women reported threats. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a change, and it started with a widow, 6 graves, and the courage to say no more. Sarah died in 1926 at the age of 65. She was buried next to James on the land they'd claimed together. Her story should have died with her, but it didn't. Because every woman who's ever been dismissed by authority, every woman who's been told she's too emotional or too weak,
every woman who's had to be twice as smart and 3 times as brave just to survive,
they know Sarah Callahan's name, and they
understand why she did what she did. The law has changed since
1883. Women have more protections now, more rights, but the fundamental truth of Sarah's story remains. Sometimes survival requires becoming dangerous. Sometimes justice requires taking matters into your own hands. And sometimes the only way to stop being prey is to become the predator. Sarah Callahan's 6 crosses still stand on that Montana property. The land is owned by a historical society now.
People visit,
take pictures, read the plaques, but they don't really understand, not unless they've felt what Sarah felt. That moment when you realize no one is coming to save you, that you have to save yourself. Sarah Callahan knew that moment intimately, and she made a choice. She chose to live, whatever the cost.